Welcome to today's Leadership Forum brought to you by the Recruitment Process Outsourcing Association. My name is Lamis Aburama. I'm the proud serving leader of the RPO Association and your host for today. I am thrilled to be joined by an amazing panel of top RPO leaders who will be discussing today's topic, getting over the O in RPO and leveling the playing field in considering talent resources. As an educational leader in recruitment process outsourcing, we are committed to providing the platform and programs to bringing together talent acquisition and RPO leaders to educating the market about RPO trends, best practices, and who's who in the RPO marketplace. We do this in collaboration with our RPO members and partners like Aberdeen, who will be moderating the panel for us today. Aberdeen has been a phenomenal strategic partner for us, bringing the analyst perspective to our practitioners' viewpoint. We are excited to continue our collaboration with Aberdeen on RPO resources such as market reports and programs like today's panel discussion. You can find all these resources in the RPO Academy available on our website at rpoassociation.org. Now, without any further ado, I would like to turn it over to Bennett Tyler with Aberdeen, who will introduce our panelists and facilitate the discussion. Bennett, welcome.
Thank you very much, Lamis. Very excited for our discussion today. We have a great panel and an important topic to cover. As the title states, we'll be talking about the O in RPO. But that O word, outsourcing, it often carries a stigma in talent management. We're here not only to discuss and dispel that stigma, but to discuss some of the real value that RPO can bring. Unlike recruiting, staffing, and automated sourcing, RPO brings outside industry knowledge into the development process for talent acquisition strategy. While organizations do form a partnership for talent acquisitions, what they're really doing is expanding their resources for strategy and action without eliminating their internal recruitment teams. The value of RPO lies in the ability to outsource how vital information is sourced from outside the company to build an industry-best talent strategy. The truth is that the stigma that the O in RPO is misplaced simply because organizations cannot access the outside perspective from inside the firm. Don't take my word for it, though. I'm just the moderator. We have an esteemed panel of experts that will be discussing this concept in detail for the next 50 minutes. With us today, we have Zach Chertok, Principal Analyst of the HCM Research Practice at Aberdeen. Zach, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your research?
Sure. So at Aberdeen, I lead the HCM practice, as Bennett said. I've been with Aberdeen for about 3 years with our team in the Boston office, where I'm calling in from today. We cover all areas of HCM looking at the holistic employee lifecycle, and RPO has definitely been a great focus of ours. And as Lamis hinted to earlier, our partnership with the RPOA has been a very big asset in developing our practice out in the RPO segment. So I'll hand it back to you, Bennett.
Excellent. Thank you, Zach. We're also joined by Jennifer Kim, who goes by Jack, from Operant Counseling. Hi, Jack. Can you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do at Operant?
Yes, thanks, Bennett. I'm actually an industrial psychologist by training and a consultant, and I have been working with employing organizations for numerous years now, working with them to not only optimize their talent acquisition strategy, but the execution of that strategy as well. And oftentimes, certainly leveraging an RPO partnership in order to do so. And I'm calling in from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Excellent. Thank you, Jack. We're also joined by Ryan Baca from About Talent. Ryan, great to have you on our panel. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Yes, thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here. Ryan Baca with About Talent. I've actually been on both sides of the seat with RPO, first as a buyer, as the Director of Talent Acquisition for a Fortune 500 company, and for the past 15 years as a practitioner and helping companies understand the value and really overcoming some of that stigma that you discussed, Ben. So happy to have this conversation with you all today.
Excellent. And finally, we're also joined by Kim Pope from Wilson HCG. Welcome, Kim. Can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your work at Wilson HCG?
Yeah, thanks, Bennett. Very excited to be here. I'm our EVP of Global Client Solutions, which means I lead our global delivery and shared services function here at Wilson. I sit in Tampa, Florida. I've been with the organization almost 10 years and been in talent acquisition for 15 plus and just love the space. So really excited for the discussion today. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for introducing yourselves and joining us today for the discussion. We've divided today's session into 5 sections, and we'll spend about 10 minutes on each. We'll start by finding the operational value in RPO. Next, we're going to discuss the perception of RPO in the market today. Then we'll go over the real requirements for partnering with an RPO. After that, we'll cover overcoming the stigma to consider the requirements and achieve the value of RPO. And finally, we're going to wrap our panel up with revisiting the value of RPO at the end. And now, with all that housekeeping squared away, we're going to jump right into our panel. We're going to start by finding the operational value in RPO. So we're talking about the components of RPO, why it's different, and some of the strategies it offers that aren't available with other methods. So Kim, I'd love to hear from you to start us off a little bit about finding the operational value in an RPO.
Yeah, well, it really depends. So RPO means a lot of different things to organizations, and we always start foundationally to really understand what is the journey that the talent acquisition team is on and really building a proactive function. So RPO consists of helping clients from end to end, full life cycle recruitment, or whether it's helping with sourcing, screening, technology, innovation, branding. There's a lot of different components. So when you're finding the value and really how do you measure the value, you have to first understand the journey that the organization is really on from a talent acquisition standpoint, and then really where the solution fits. And then it's the agility and the flexibility of aligning that solution to those areas that are going to help augment the organization. And then a lot of times when leaders are really looking to engage the RPO, some of the business objectives that they're looking to solve are bringing more innovation to the team, the talent acquisition expertise. You kind of mentioned this in the beginning of the intro, that outside perspective in and those best practices, a lot of the scalability that the solution can really provide, and then the data analysis to really further augment the function. So it really starts with understanding what's the journey that talent acquisition team is on, and really where do they want it to go over that period of time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kim. Now, can you expand a little bit about that journey, or Ryan, I'm not sure if you want to weigh in a little bit about kind of piggyback on what she was talking about the scalability, the journey that you need to go on when you're bringing in that outside perspective.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, Kim hit it on the head. I mean, RPO is really, I think, initially started with just the recruiting process itself, and you can take each step of that process and componentize it, and there's value to be had in each one of those, each element of that process. But over the years, and as RPO has evolved, we've seen a lot more operational value come to the forefront in terms of employment branding and looking at the technologies and innovations within the recruiting space, and really becoming much more of a consultative partner for both talent acquisitions, HR, sometimes operational leaders who really want to focus on that strategy that they may not be top of mind to them on a daily basis. And so I know Jax does a lot of work with some of her clients in that realm as well.
Excellent. That was actually, I was hoping to hear from Jack next, and if you could touch on some of those strategies that we've kind of been hinting at, those strategies that RPO allows that you really can't get out of your traditional recruitment.
Okay, well, certainly expanding on both what Kim and Ryan have said. I mean, I've worked with clients and deployed RPO solutions for, maybe a small project where there is just a particular hiring need that is isolated and the incumbent team, whatever that configuration is, just can't accommodate it, or there needs to be some specialization. I've implemented a partial RPO where they might take on a particular job family or for a particular location working with a client. And then I've worked with full RPO implementations where they take on and become truly the legitimate internal recruiting team, top to bottom. And Kim and Ryan both mentioned components, but it's everything from headcount planning, job definition, getting your ATS set up, possibly labor market mapping, data management, reporting and analytics. There's just so much more capacity today in RPO because it's their line business. They invest in an infrastructure that allows them to deliver expert level service that a support function that sits inside a client as a support function would never get the investment in that infrastructure. And it's just, we're able to leverage the key components as it logically makes sense, as Kim said, where that client is, where the hiring organization is. And sometimes if they're, I've gone in and built one from scratch using an RPO where there's not a stitch of recruiting capacity. Others we've just need to retool or just augment. So it's just having all of the tools in a toolkit that an RPO organization has today is what is really, I think, the power behind the partnership.
Excellent. Now, Zach, I've been saving you for last here for the first to introduce our topic here. I'd love to hear what the Aberdeen research is saying. Do you have any data on RPO? Data on possibly what people are able to do, what these companies, the benefits they might be seeing from leveraging these types of strategies?
Absolutely, and all of the data speaks to a lot of the elements that Kim, Ryan, and Jack have all spoken to. That at the end of the day, the RPO is able to bring in the strategic outside knowledge that's cumulative of all the clients they're working with and the market research they're doing to be able to source the right talent for the right positions at the right time for any of their partner organizations. One of the things, for instance, that we write about a lot are, not just what employers are looking for in the quality of their talent, but what employees are looking for from the organizations that they work for. And you wouldn't believe how often organizations get this wrong in their traditional sourcing and screening channels. The top things that employees are looking for are competitive growth opportunities in their own individual right, but also the relevance to the organization, knowing that they're going to get some security from being able to connect their goals to the goals of the organization and achieve both of those at the same time. If those goals aren't well defined, as Jack, you alluded to in the job description, in the descriptioning that goes on, or if the matchup isn't strategic, as you spoke to, or if that external knowledge factor to pair those up doesn't come in like you spoke to, Ryan, it's organizations are just going to keep missing the mark. And when we actually take a look at the metrics between RPO users and just users of traditional staffing and recruiting, RPO users are far and away more able to see increased likelihood at hiring one of the top 3 candidates more than 50% of the time for a role. They see increased employee tenure and reduced employee turnover. When we look at that first metric of the increased ability to hire one of the top 3 candidates, RPO users see an increase for every 1% that an organization invests in RPO. They're able to boost their ability to hire one of the top 3 candidates by about 1.8 times the traditional recruiting system. For likelihood to see increased employee tenure, that jumps to 1.6 times. And in reduced employee tenure, that goes up to about 50% more than what we typically see with traditional staffing and recruiting. And those statistics are very, very compelling.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Zach. Now, before we do move into our next section where we're going to be discussing the perception of RPO in the market today, I do just want to kind of wrap up the operational value discussion with going back to Jack real quick. You talked about setting some of these up from scratch. When you're putting together one of these programs, if you're embarking on one of these RPO journeys, do you have any tips or tricks for sort of getting to that operational value quickly or anything like that for our audience?
I think probably my biggest piece of advice would be to really listen to your RPO, right? Because this would be one of many installations, setups, and engagements they have. So they've tried and tested, and they know what works, and they know where kind of those hidden landmines are. So when I'm partnering with an RPO from a build from scratch endeavor. And it's almost always a panic situation because a client organization, hiring organization, has identified a significant need that, something in their strategic plan, which is relying on people capacity, has maybe been left to the last piece of the puzzle, and then they're in panic mode. So, selecting the right RPO partner who can come in with not a cookie cutter solution, because that never works, but with implementation and launch plans that are vetted, tested, they can execute extremely quickly, and try not to reinvent every wheel, or and take advantage of the learning, and just kind of recognize that they're here to help you. And we've been able to build from scratch. I've done it certainly more than once with really good success, and it's just trusting your partner, because they're experts and they do know more. They do know more about talent acquisition than the hiring organization does. They're experts, and you need to rely on that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're going to move away from this topic about the operational value. We're going to get into a little bit more of the details down the road. But first, I want to go back to the title of our session today, dispelling that stigma around the outsourcing in RPO. So to start us off, actually, I want to, Ryan, would love to hear just a little bit about where that stigma comes from, and what it might mean, maybe your own perception of what RPO actually is, not just this sort of the stigma around it.
Yeah, sure. Well, RPO really is a derivative of business process outsourcing, right? And where did business process outsourcing kind of started? It really, got its start in technology and managing technology projects, and outsourced contact centers, etc. And so when I first got into the industry, I struggled myself with this the word outsourcing at the end of what we did, because it really didn't depict the service of what we were actually delivering. So I was fighting that battle long ago for recruitment process solutions or recruitment process services, because that's really more indicative of the value that RPO providers bring. But as time has held true, I've given up the battle on the semantics, and have just decided to focus on the value of what it is that we bring. But they are two very different elements of what it is, whereas RPO is much more of an ingrained partnership, an embedded partnership with our customers, whereas BPOs, we're traditionally, a contractual agreement based on, service level agreements that were defined, within those contractual elements.
Now, Kim, with your consulting experience, I'm sure you've talked to a bunch of different teams and leaders throughout different companies. What is the, can you just kind of run us through what a lot of them, their first sort of impression, what they think, what their impression of RPO in general is? And is it a positive one?
Yeah, I think it's grown over the years, the more the market's really been educated, and I think the more success stories that there are out there. But a lot of the conversations, especially when an organization has never done RPO or not as familiar, it's always, are we going to lose our jobs? And is this going to take away, from the HR function being involved in recruiting? That's always the number one question that we see. And so a lot of the conversation goes around educating around the elevation that it does, how it makes them more strategic in their roles, how it helps elevate them as business partners within the organization because of this infrastructure that's really coming in to give them the support that they typically don't always have, especially in corporate functions. A lot of times where they're lacking is just resources, time, technology, some of those things they don't necessarily have, like either the funding or just the resources to execute. So you really have to walk through the infrastructure that an RPO provides them to help them better in their roles, and tell those stories from a change agent perspective to really help change that mindset. And then a lot of times you don't see it until you start going through implementation, and that's really when it starts clicking, as you are showing them all of the types of market data and reporting and speed to hire that the new resources that they have really help them evolve. But that's usually the first conversation when explaining RPO that comes up, is that first question.
Now, Zach, I'd love to hear any sort of research you might have, really when it comes to the perception. Again, I'm not sure if you have any sort of splits in your data, or if that's a question that you've asked, but I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit and ask you that question, if you've got any data on how people are reacting to either the implementation or just the idea of RPO in their companies.
So Kim, everything you spoke to is true. I mean, when we know about certainty in the job roles, when we know about everybody's insecurities about will they be there tomorrow, won't they be there tomorrow, everybody's worried about that, not just HR. And, we've talked a lot about in the general market about this transformation going on in HR, not just digital, but the role is changing as managers get more performance-based roles, as data gets more put into their hands. What is HR doing? What's their involvement? But I'm happy to note that from the data that we have on RPO, it's actually strengthening HR's involvement in the strategy development, which is where most operations teams, where more than 60% of them end up rolling up to in the absence of a CHRO, really want HR to be. They want them to be strategically balancing engagement at all levels from candidate to employee with the cost issue that all organizations are facing of how do we not only necessarily execute on reductions or better management of labor costs, but how do we gain more visibility into them? Today, when we take a look at the data, the best in class in terms of Aberdeen's maturity framework, which are those top 20% of performers in the KPIs that we ask about, are now about 70% more likely than the rest of companies to engage RPOs to rectify their talent placement strategy shortcomings that are leading them to actually achieve stronger, longer lasting employee tenure, which again is helping to reduce that turnover figure that I spoke to earlier. And what that means for the HR organizations is that actually makes them look really good. Longer tenure means that they can engage in redeployment inside organizations. They get better candidates, better, stronger talent coming in that's more applicable to a wider array of skill sets needed by the organization. And for HR, that means they reduce costs of short-term training requirements. They reduce costs of turnover. They reduce their actual investment in talent acquisition resources versus overall performance management that today for the average non-RPO organization reaches a ratio of 2 to 1, which is crazy when you think about it. So in terms of achieving a better ROI of the workforce, RPO is absolutely emerging as a strong asset.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Zach. Now, earlier, Kim touched on this idea that a lot of these sort of issues, a lot of these hang-ups, they start to sort of go away once the implementation starts, people start to see things working. Now, Jack, earlier we touched base with you on some of the implementation strategies. I'd love to hear if you've seen any sort of specific perceptions that people have had that they've really had to kind of come to grips with and come to terms with and overcome in order to really actually get benefits out of these RPOs.
Well, I think probably the most important thing that is kind of getting back to that, to the outsourcing word. And, really, if you had to replace that word, maybe it's insourcing, and that, as Ryan was saying, that it is a true partnership. And I think overcoming the notion that the RPO or RPI partner that you're working with is not a vendor, and because it just can't be a vendor relationship when you are when you have an RPO engagement, because the a hiring event, so a single hiring event requisition, cannot be done by the RPO team alone. It can't be done by the hiring decision maker alone. It has to be the two parties coming together working in collaboration. So overcoming this notion of I'm the client, you're the vendor, the client is always right, some of those kind of common sayings that we hear, it doesn't work when you are working with an RPO partner. They truly have to be your colleague, because they're sitting beside you, working in tandem, bringing a peer level of expertise, which is talent sourcing, understanding the labor market, screening and vetting, and putting one of those top 3 candidates or the top 3 candidates in front of you, such that the manager, the other peer in the equation, is doing his or her job, the determining, will this person fit with my team? Can they perform the work that I need him or her to do? It's that partnership and making sure that I oftentimes spend a lot of time working with my clients to just help them understand the nature of the partnership, and that overcoming a vendor buyer approach, that if you really see this as an embedded colleague and a set of colleagues and a team that's augmenting what you're doing strategically, it just becomes a different type of arrangement, and that's where you see the really impact and the power of what the engagement can be.
Excellent. You said this word partnership quite a few times, which is great, because that is exactly where we're headed with our next section, the real requirements of partnering with an RPO. So, Kim, I'd love to hear from you to start again. How do you define that partnership? How do you start?
How do you start with that? Well, it starts really early. When you're sitting down and having these exploratory conversations, you're not just only looking at a solution, you're looking at two organizations' cultures as well, really coming together to align. And, we take a lot of time and effort in the beginning in having those conversations around what are those cultures and values, and how are we going to build this program together. That really sets the foundation to build that strong partnership over time. I think the other piece is it really goes down to transparency and really understanding what it is that the organization's challenges are and how you're going to work together to build the right solution to fit those challenges, but being transparent that there's going to be kind of bumps along the way as any organization you're diving in to understand data or workforce planning or hiring manager relationships, or even kind of previous biases and working through all that change management. It's having those transparent conversations up front to really lay the foundation of how you're going to get through that together. And then the third part is aligning the team and the infrastructure that fits, culturally, and really what the client wants to see from an outcome that will really help the organization feel comfortable with the recruitment infrastructure, whether it's functional locally or regionally, a lot of things that you take into consideration, but really listening and understanding what's the best fit for that solution and designing it together. Those are a couple, there's so many more, but those are just a couple of the things when you're really setting the foundation up front, which is so critical in that RPO partnership to really start it off right.
Now, as a potential employer, while doing that setup process, are there any things that I should really make sure that I'm keeping top of mind when trying to establish and maintain a successful relationship or partnership with an RPO? Ryan, I'd love to hear any sort of insight you might have there.
Yeah, Greg, I'm smiling because it's pretty eye-opening early on in an RPO endeavor, because you learn real quick that it's not a contingency model, right? It's a commitment model. And so in a contingency model, if we were to compare and contrast those two models, you may get a requisition, you may work the requisition, you may find somebody, and you may get paid, right? There's a lot of maybes in that equation. Whereas an RPO model, in a commitment model, you're going to come to terms early up front around what the need is, to Kim's point. And during that implementation, there's going to be involvement. But the more involvement that you figure out up front in terms of how you want your process to be designed, what sources, what technologies, how you want your firm to be represented through your RPO provider, a lot of those answers, make the process itself much more efficient. So there is involvement. We don't want to minimize that. But once you have that involvement and you really nail down that strategy, you get some of those operational efficiencies that Zach talked about. You get those improved metrics. And so it's a commitment model in the sense that, yes, we're all in this together and we're working towards the same goal. But over time, you get the outcome is a much more efficient process and a better result. Excellent.
Now that the commitment model versus the contingency model does bring up an important question, and that is regarding cost. So Jack, I'd love to hear from you. about the cost, how it's justified, the pricing versus the value that you're going to get out of an RPO.
Well, that's a big question, and in my experience, having worked with a variety of organizations implementing RPO, is that for the level of service and capability and outcome, so all of the things that all of us have been talking about, the strategy, the systems, the tools, the understanding of the labor market, the expertise, the ability to attract, vet, deliver candidates for the for another type of arrangement or organization or an incumbent or internal team to perform at the same level given the infrastructure that an RPO might have, is it won't cost more than a competing model, has been my experience. I think it's determining what you're signing up for, and that you generally get a lot more, and so therefore maybe you'll spend the same amount of money, but you just get so much more. And if you're going to perform, have similar outcomes, you probably actually will spend less, I have found. But I never really advise my clients to seek to try to spend the least amount of money possible. That's me. And that's because I think there's almost nothing more important than an organization can do than to attract the right talent in the first place. Because if you put the right people in the right roles at the right time, everything else in business gets easier. So it's about optimizing the spend, not necessarily reducing the spend. Certainly none of us would advocate for waste. But it's just knowing, what does the client need? What are their business goals, and how does talent fit into those goals? And then make sure you're building the model that delivers that and spending wisely. So I think the business case comes down to really what you're buying and articulate the value that it provides, and some of the metrics that Zach was mentioning, all the downstream metrics. And then, the upfront metrics are, the time to fill and so on, that are also really important given the business needs.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Great answer to that. I also want to hear from Zach, sort of on the similar topic, really, with the research that you've collected on the implementation of these programs and the performance of some of the leaders that you see. Is there any sort of connection there, and does that cost really come into play, or are the dividends well worth it?
It seems like such an ironic question given today's topic. Is there a connection there? The answer is of course. A lot of the metrics that I've spoken to already are fed by this exact topic. It's fed by everything that Jack's talked about, that Ryan, introed, and that Kim's backed up, even going through the checklist of what's involved with RPO. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is not just hiring for today's open positions, but hiring the candidates that are going to come in, yes, to fill what you need today, but are going to deliver value, over 2, 5, and 10 years. There's going to be a business case that emerges for the talent coming into the organization. And RPOs far and away outperform almost all other recruitment, sourcing, and screening strategies to be able to get talent in there that's going to last beyond the industry standard 1.6 to 2 years that employees now are staying with the organization, scaling down the generations. One of the statistics I love rolling out of the gate when we're illustrating this recruitment strategy story is that when we look at the average amount of reinvestment that goes into talent acquisition versus talent and performance management, talent acquisition is getting more spend than talent and performance management by a ratio of up to 2 to 1. That is heavily, heavily front-loaded on trying to get the right talent to the right place at the right time for today's circumstances. So if you think about the internal recruitment strategy, on the one hand, only being good as the reigning internal performance metrics can define top talent today. So that's absent what new innovations and things are coming out outside the organization. Not only is your talent profile limited, your scope is limited, your talent pools are more limited when you're all trying to go it alone. When we look at what that means for the quality of talent coming in, scaling down the generations, it takes about 2.2 years for an employee to have to stay with the organization to be able to pay back all the investment made in bringing them in. If they're leaving within 1.6 to 2 years, based on an internal recruitment strategy, you're not really running in the black, let alone starting to produce a profit off having that employee work for the organization. When you work with an RPO, the strategy goes far beyond just getting the employee in the organization. They look at the candidate for where else they could go relative to the needs of the organization and where the organizational strategy is going. They also look at what the employee's goals are to look at the kind of resources and coach the employer on the kind of resources they need to be offering to, yes, get that employee, but then retain them and help them develop into future needs of the organization. And what that means is that the tenure statistics among RPO acquired talent are much, much better than those that are turning out for those coming off of a traditional recruitment and sourcing strategy. RPOs are about long-term goals and long-term benefits. So Jack's absolutely right. You might make the same investment or maybe slightly more for the partnership with an RPO, but the resource benefit on the back end is 2, 3, sometimes 4 times what you can get for the benefit on sourcing and strategy. So for, say, 1.2 times the initial investment made in sourcing and screening, you get 3 or 4 times the value benefit on the back end.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Zach, for that. It's always great to put the numbers next to what we're talking about, so thank you. We're going to move into our second to last section, and that is overcoming that stigma, to consider the requirements and achieve the value that we've been talking about. Now, I'm convinced that this has all been great, but now if I was at an organization where, you know, not everybody's seen this, and maybe they need a little bit more convincing, Ryan, do you have any strategies to sell your firm on RPO if they are still a little bit skeptical?
Yeah, well, it's a different mindset, right? Recruiting's really been around since the industrial age, and everyone's somewhat familiar with an agency model of some type. And so the biggest sell is overcoming what's familiar and what's known. But that's often when we have our greatest breakthroughs, right? Is if we keep doing the same thing the same way, we're likely not to get different results. So RPO offers a different model and to achieve different results, higher level results. And really the salient point is what we've been saying here, right? It's a focused effort, right? I can speak for About Talent that's what we do is total talent management, recruitment process outsourcing. And so that's our focus every day, each and every day. Our customers have different focuses, right? They're worried about their shareholders. They're worried about their products, their services. And so it's a focused model where we're able to dedicate the time and resources to achieve that greater result. The other element is around service level agreements. I mentioned that earlier, but it's around understanding the supply market and understanding how difficult it is going to be to recruit for certain roles and bringing that knowledge and bringing that data to our customers and ultimately coming to some agreement to say, hey, we can provide, you can expect X result and we'll stand behind that result. But that result may not be a hire because ultimately you're making the hiring decision, not the RPO firm. But we're doing everything in our power to get you the right talent at the right time, hopefully at the most valuable at the most valuable point.
Excellent. Now, earlier we talked a lot about partnerships and the importance of a good partnership. Jack, could you talk to us a little bit about what makes a good partner and what makes a bad partner, what that separation is? How do I find a good partner?
In terms of, finding the right RPO partner, I think just, again, it kind of goes back to one of the earliest things that Kim said, in that, like, understanding where the organization is and what their needs are. But, again, I think the partnership is truly a two-way partnership. So I think it's the RPO and the hiring organization need to make sure that they're aligned in how they deliver and that they can understand the kind of the unique contributions that the RPO brings. Do they have prior expertise in maybe the same industry where they can leverage that? But then also the partnership on buying side is more about kind of appreciating that just the specialization and how sophisticated talent acquisition is today. And as Ryan said, organizations have been hiring for decades and hundreds of years, and having people join their teams. But really, sometimes it's lost on organizations just really how sophisticated the process and protocols and data and mechanisms are in order to deliver that talent. It's almost like the organization and maybe core HR is a primary care physician, and it's their job to understand the patient. But when the patient breaks his or her arm, you bring in the surgeon or the orthopedic specialist to set the bone and cast it, and recognizing that that takes a unique knowledge set, and it's that partnership and kind of understanding really how specialized it is now, and just finding a partner who's maybe can work well with the organization's size, their growth trajectory, has knowledge of the relevant labor pools, do they have a global presence if that's necessary, or partnerships that allow you to deal with that. So I think it's just, again, understanding and doing your due diligence on the front end and understanding what your needs are, and then think through who might be the best partner for you, and then appreciating what they can bring.
Thank you very, very much. We're just about, we've got just about 15 minutes left, I think. So we've got a little bit more to cover on this topic. I'd love to hear your take on this, Kim, as well, before we jump into the value. So in your experience, have you had the opportunity to sort of help dispel some of this stigma sort of firsthand? And if so, how that kind of worked out for both the person who had the kind of negative perception and maybe what they saw down the line when you helped them out?
Yeah, quite a bit. And I think the biggest thing is going in with a humble mindset and just really understanding that it's working through it together. And again, like I mentioned, the way that you really truly see it evolve is just by diving in and actually executing. And through that execution, really showing the process, showing the wins, and telling the story, and then being able to use that story to communicate at all levels through that change management process is really when you start to see it evolve and grow. And it is one of the most rewarding experiences as well. Going through that is when you really truly see the RPO relationship be successful within an organization. And then you look at year one, you look at year two, and you see those business impact metrics really evolve. A lot of times companies, back to your question around, I think, cost per hire, that's really one of the early stage measurements that is a little bit easier, in my opinion, to be able to measure at the front end of a relationship, because you have less metrics and less transparency in the process. So naturally you evolve to going towards kind of that cost discussion in the beginning. But year one, year two, as an RPO brings more of that transparency and measurements, you can actually take those business analysis metrics when you're looking at productivity, you're looking at turnover, you're looking at quality, all of those things combined to really tell the story is when they start to see the true value of the RPO relationship continue to grow. So it happens almost in every relationship, but just in different ways. It just depends, again, back to the journey of where the organization is, and then how those particular solutions impact that business, and then how you tell the story.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That does bring us into very, very well, actually, as you did touch on some of the value that RPO brings. It brings us into our last segment, and that is revisiting the value. We're just going to kind of reiterate some of the great things about RPO that we've discussed throughout the last 40 minutes. I'd love to start with you, Ryan, while we still have you. Is there anywhere that we haven't discussed yet where you get sort of like hidden value from RPO, maybe not right in the recruitment space, but just generally speaking for your company?
Yeah, and every engagement is unique and different, and I think there are always those aha moments. But for me, and what we've seen kind of in the industry here, there's been a lot more value recently as it relates to, frankly, recruitment marketing. That's been an emergence of a whole area of competence that maybe didn't exist 15 years ago. When we were really just executing against the tactics of those of those traditional recruiting process steps. So, I'd say as a trend, as far as trends goes, that's been one that's been really highlighted as companies have become smarter about their consumer brand. They've translated that into their employer value proposition, and then that then has translated into the need for RPO providers to bring consultation and expertise around how to market all of the wonderful things about our clients to talent communities that we serve.
Awesome, thank you. Now, really, when we're getting into value, this is where I want to hear from you, Zach. The research, where is the value? How do I maximize that value? Where are the best in class finding value? What is RPO really doing for companies out there in the market right now, and how can I get a piece of that pie?
Sure. So I think that most everyone, Jack, Ryan, and Kim, you've all spoken to the value of the partnership, and that is the key to the value. So getting real for the practitioner side at the moment, apart from the RPO provider side, the first recommendation that I have is when you're selecting your partner, absolutely, as I think everybody now has said, really listen to what the partners are telling you, make the list of what they're offering. But I was actually just down at a forum at Columbia University with their HCM program where their panel talked about, how to make the case for these resources, how to go in, and once you yourself get over the stigma, how to get somebody to get on board with the resources. If it's your CHRO, good news for you, you've got a champion that's going to translate that value proposition into any language needed to get to seal the deal, whether it's the finance team or the operations team. For those of you that don't have CHROs, congratulations, you're rolling up to the operations team, which is how do we strategically manage costs and reduce risk to the organization. So all I can say is just try and translate these value propositions into the language that those stakeholders are going to understand. Some of you have experience at it, some of you are new at it, but some of the key benefits that we've talked about today are broadening talent pools for one, being able to reach more talent because RPOs come in with a much broader scope on the market, increasing your ready to reach, ready to go intelligence quotient when it comes to understanding the talent market and how it plugs into your organization. Ryan, you alluded to this great with the new competencies, being able to ramp up and accelerate the rate at which you can increase your understanding and your inclusion of new strategic sources that will make you more competitive towards recruiting the right talent for your organization. Increasing tenure, drawing the right candidates to the right organization at the right time. This is not just about the right role, it's about the right organizational match. So increasing your tenure, increasing the value proposition on labor overall, and all of the financial and operational benefit metrics that come with that. Reduced turnover, we know, reduces training costs, increases innovation rates, increases teamwork, builds mentors inside the organization to facilitate better generational shifts. For all of you out there listening to this, we all know that the workforce is dealing with the retirement of the baby boomers who largely kept Gen X out of the market to the point that there's no transitional generation between the skill sets that the baby boomers accrued over 30, 40 years of experience and millennials, Gen Z, and the tail end of Gen Y that are coming into the workforce right now having none of those soft skills. It's a large reason we have this gap. If you build longer tenure in your organization, you ramp up that experience unique to your organization, and RPOs are key to getting that to happen. All of this connects together to the engagement issue, again, to the tenure and retention issue, and RPOs are proven at this point, not just from our data at Aberdeen, but from countless reports that you can read out there about the value proposition of RPOs to improve all of these metrics above and beyond the standard recruiting and sourcing options that you might have at your disposal. But and they do this across the board, and they do this a lot faster. So it's not just about value, it's also the speed to realize that value. These are two arguments that absolutely will help you sell it to the COO, to the CFO, and if you have the CHRO on hand, will make you that much stronger an advocate to get the resources that you need.
Excellent, thank you, Zach. Just a couple minutes left, but before we go, I do want to talk to our last two panelists who haven't weighed in on the value that you'd see from an RPO program. So starting with you, Jack, it'd be, I know this might be tough. We've talked about a lot of different values that it can provide. Is there one that stands out amongst the crowd that is just really the main reason you need to look into RPO?
Oh, there's so many, but and the rest of the panel has covered it. But one actually that hasn't been talked about a lot is scalability, and it's relating to a couple of things that others have said. But as business is moving at warp speed today, and strategy changes, turns on a dime, being able to scale up and scale down very quickly with a consistent, compliant process. So risk mitigation and scalability, both up and down, to match the business strategy, that is so valuable. An internal team cannot do that. If there's surge hiring, you cannot augment your team fast enough, just meaning your team has to cover, double the workload, and it just means slow hiring for everyone. And then when you have a lull in hiring, whether you have a seasonal business or there's some sort of strategic reason to slow down hiring, you might be have overstaffed, and then your cost looks higher, or you have to downsize, which is painful. So that whole scalability is actually, it seems really basic, but it is a really significant part of the value proposition, as well as that compliance and protocol, because you have trained teams that are doing things consistently, because hiring has a litigious component to it. So that can't really be understated. One major blip in hiring that results in some sort of disparate treatment can be an expensive endeavor for an organization. And you just have much more control, compliance, and just the ability for a partner to really deliver what you need them to do at the time you need it. It's really high value.
Excellent, great stuff. Definitely not something we touched on today, so important add there. Thank you. And now, Kim, to sort of wrap us up, can you just summarize literally the 50 minutes of this entire presentation? Now, I jest, of course, but it would be great to just hear sort of a summation of some of the value, not necessarily the biggest value you get or some of the hidden ones, just really like, why do I need to look into recruitment process outsourcing?
Yeah, well, I think it's a holistic solution that can really be tailored to the organization's initiatives, business drivers, challenges, and the agility and the flexibility of that is, I think, the biggest value in itself. But lastly, it's the consulting arm that an RPO brings to really help organizations, and you heard all of them here, whether it's process optimization, technology, the technology acumen that comes from an RPO of working in multiple systems, having implemented myself multiple ATSs and CRMs, and being able to consult clients through what works, what doesn't work, and then having a tech stack that is really coming with partnerships and really preferred partners and pricing and things like that an RPO brings, is another huge value add, that not only does this huge infrastructure support an organization holistically, but it comes with all of these other consulting pieces with it. So, my opinion, and a lot of us here on this call, it is a really, really fantastic solution when organizations embrace it with full arms and really leverage it to the most of its ability, and the transparency and the partnership that goes with it is really what makes it so successful.
Awesome stuff. This has all been excellent, just very great. So I want to thank all of you for joining us for this panel today. It's been very educational. I hope our audience learned a ton. So thank you, Jack. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Zach. And thank you, Kim, for joining us to do this panel discussion today. And thank you, Lemise, for hosting us. And with that, I'll turn it over to you for some closing remarks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Bennett. Excellent job facilitating the discussion today, and excellent discussion, everyone. I'm very honored to be in the company of all of you, and just bringing the 360 viewpoint of the topic we talked about, the analyst view as well as the practitioners and the consultant view. I loved listening to all the discussion points you guys brought and the value around RPO. And while I was thinking how fascinating that we're having this discussion today and how different it might have been if we had it 10 years ago and probably 10 years from now. Just RPO keeps evolving and keeps changing, and this is what we continue to do as an association, is to report on what RPO is and what the direction it keeps going and moving into. So for more details and more information on the topic for today, please visit the RPOA website at rpoassociation.org, and I would love to thank all our panelists and our moderator for today. Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.